It should have happened because this wasn't. Now, again, teams can be wrong. The league as a whole can be wrong. Hell, the Baltimore Ravens drafted a 25-year-old tight end before they drafted Lamar Jackson in the same draft. The die is not cast on who should.
Before a single snap was taken, the doubts had already been written into the story. For weeks, whispers floated through the league that Shedeur Sanders was in over his head, that without endless hours of preseason reps, he would be swallowed whole the moment the real games began. Those predictions weren't just casual observations, they were delivered with the certainty of people convinced they'd already seen this film before. A rookie quarterback, short on practice, tossed into the fire with little preparation. The script was supposed to end with a quick collapse, but sometimes the game writes its own chapters, and Sanders was already drafting something very different. What made his situation more striking was how little on-field time he had been given early on. The preseason, usually a laboratory for rookies to adjust, was for him mostly a spectator's seat. Others took the snaps, others ran the drills, others soaked in the experience. He was left to watch, to think, and to mentally rehearse without the rhythm that comes only from repetitions. For most young quarterbacks, that would have been the start of a nightmare losing ground before the season had even begun. But this wasn't just about preparation, it was about perception. Coaches, analysts, and even segments of the fan base assumed that without those precious reps, he would walk into the huddle unsteady, unsure, and out of sync. Yet there were observers who saw it differently. From the outside, it was clear that this was less about talent and more about the system around him. The question wasn't whether he could throw a football. Anyone who had watched him in college knew the answer to that, but whether the structure was designed to showcase him or sideline him. In that context, every moment became symbolic. Every rep he didn't get seemed to speak louder than the ones he did. The idea took hold that perhaps the setup was working against him, shaping a narrative before he'd had a chance to shape it himself. Layered on top of this was the constant background noise of character critiques. There were the predictable digs about his personality, about his supposed lack of readiness, about his interviews with certain teams. These criticisms came from the same circles that had made puzzling personnel moves in the past, yet they were repeated as if they carried the weight of unshakable truth. For Sanders, it was a familiar pattern, people defining his future without actually seeing what he could do in the present. His collegiate career told a different story. He had put in years of work at 2 programs, not simply riding a famous last name, but grinding through the demands of high-level football. He had the rare privilege of being coached by his father, a football mind with a Hall of Fame resume, but privilege doesn't complete passes or absorb hits in the pocket. The work had to be done, and Sanders did it. His development could be traced year over year, a steady climb rather than a lucky break. For anyone who had paid attention, the idea that he was unprepared rang hollow. When the chance finally came to step onto the field, the response was decisive. His passes were crisp, his footwork balanced, his timing precise. The ball came out of his hands like it had somewhere urgent to be, and it usually arrived exactly where it needed to go. That early stretch, flawless completions, multiple touchdowns, and not a single turnover wasn't the product of luck. It was the visible result of hours of work that most never saw. In that moment, the quiet preparation met the loud stage, and the outcome spoke for itself. This wasn't the story of a wide-eyed rookie fumbling with basics. On the field, he looked like he belonged. Every decision had intent. Every throw had confidence behind it. He wasn't just filling a role, he was steering the offense. The presence he carried was enough to change the tone of the team around him. Teammates began running routes with sharper precision. Linemen dug deeper to protect him, and even the sideline energy shifted. The locker room, often slow to embrace new leadership, seemed to lean toward him naturally. The way he handled himself under pressure made it clear this was a player built for moments that defined seasons. As the games continued, the conversation around him began to change. The early skepticism didn't vanish entirely, but it grew quieter. Analysts, who had once predicted his collapse, were now hedging their words, pointing out the poise he showed in situations where rookies often falter. The argument that his draft position defined his ceiling started to sound outdated. Talent doesn't always arrive in the first round, and here was living proof. Still, not everyone was quick to concede. Some clung to the idea that limited reps would eventually catch up to him, that the lack of first-team practice would be exposed over time. The reality on the field told a different tale. When opportunities arose, whether through injury, rotation, or necessity, he answered them with composure. Mistakes, when they happened, didn't linger. Adjustments came quickly, as though he had been cataloging every scenario in his mind long before it happened under the stadium lights. The deeper truth of his emergence was that it wasn't just about personal performance, it was about influence. Winning over a locker room is an art form, and Sanders was doing it without grand speeches or forced bravado. His approach was steady, grounded in execution rather than theatrics. That consistency earned trust, and trust is currency in professional sports. The more his teammates believed in him, the more the offense seemed to operate as a single unit. This intangible shift is hard to measure, but anyone watching closely could feel it. By mid-season, it was no longer just the insiders talking. Fans were taking notice, some even questioning why he hadn't been given more opportunities earlier. His impact was undeniable. He had gone from being viewed as a contingency plan to someone who could anchor the future. The very narrative that once painted him as underprepared had been replaced by one that saw him as a difference maker. What made his rise even more compelling was how naturally it seemed to happen. There were no manufactured moments, no orchestrated campaigns to change public opinion. His reputation grew in the same way his drives did, play by play, decision by decision. It was the kind of transformation that happens when preparation meets opportunity, and both are embraced without hesitation. There was also an unspoken challenge in everything he did. To those who had underestimated him, his performance was a quiet but firm rebuttal. The suggestion that he was simply a product of his last name seemed increasingly hollow. Anyone watching closely could see the work, the discipline, and the instincts that belonged entirely to him. He was crafting his own path, and it was leading somewhere meaningful. As the season unfolded, the stakes naturally rose. Every game carried the potential to redefine both his role and his team's trajectory. For someone in his position, the margin for error was thin, but the potential reward was enormous. Each successful series was a building block, not just in the standings, but in the perception of what he could be. By the time the year's final games approached, it was clear that this was not a fleeting burst of form. This was the foundation of something larger. The ultimate question became not whether he could play in the NFL that had been answered, but how far he could take this. His early months had already shifted expectations inside the organization and beyond. The chemistry with his teammates had evolved into something tangible. The quiet confidence that defined his presence was no longer just noted, it was counted on. It's rare for a rookie to alter the internal climate of a team so quickly. Yet that's exactly what was happening. The locker room energy was different. The sideline interactions were different. The way opponents prepared for the game was different. Even those who remained skeptical about his long-term ceiling couldn't deny the short-term reality. He was changing the team from within. In the end, his journey wasn't just about statistics or highlight reels. It was about reshaping a narrative before it had the chance to calcify. From the moment he first stepped onto the field, every decision, every throw, every quiet moment of leadership was part of a broader statement that he wasn't here to survive the league, but to compete in it at the highest level. That statement has now been made, and it will echo into every game to come. The road ahead will still test him. The NFL doesn't stop challenging players simply because they've had a strong start. Defenses will adjust, opponents will study his tendencies, and the margin for victory will shrink. But the early chapters have already proven that he has both the skill and the mindset to meet those challenges head-on. The question now is no longer whether he belongs. It's how far he can go and how quickly he can take those around him with him. Whatever the answer, the league is watching, his teammates are ready, and the conversation about Shedeur Sanders has been permanently rewritten. Opponents felt it too. Defensive coordinators started building specific game plans to contain him, a sign of respect that few rookies receive. The adjustments they made, extra coverage schemes, disguised blitzes, shifting personnel, spoke volumes about the level of threat he posed. Some games became chess matches, with each side trying to outthink the other. In those moments, his ability to stay composed became even more valuable. The deeper into the season it went, the more he began to embody the role of a leader in ways that went beyond X's and O's. He encouraged teammates after tough plays, celebrated their successes with genuine enthusiasm, and maintained a steady presence in high-pressure situations. It was leadership by example, and it was working. The roster was becoming more cohesive, more disciplined, and more confident in its collective ability to win. Through it all, one theme became clear. This wasn't about proving doubters wrong for the sake of validation. It was about proving to himself, his teammates, and the organization that he could be the steady hand they needed. That motivation showed in his preparation, his play, and his interactions. Every game, every snap, every read was another opportunity to reinforce the trust that had begun to take root. By this stage, the earlier concerns about his readiness seemed almost irrelevant. He had faced enough situations both favorable and challenging to demonstrate that he could adapt and perform at a high level. The label of rookie still applied in technical terms, but in practical terms, he was already functioning with the maturity and composure of a seasoned starter. And yet, even with the progress he had made, the journey was still in its early stages. The league would continue to test him, and each season would bring new challenges, but the foundation had been laid. The transformation from untested prospect to respected leader had taken place in full view, and it had changed the way people inside and outside the organization viewed both him and the team. The story was no longer about a quarterback fighting for reps. It was about a quarterback building something bigger, a culture, a standard, and a future that others could rally around. And as the season moved forward, it became impossible to ignore the feeling that this was only the beginning. The closing stretch of the season was where everything Sanders had built would be put to the ultimate test. The early games had been about proving he could handle the speed of the NFL. The middle of the season had been about winning trust and establishing himself as a leader. Now, as the games grew in importance and the margins shrank, it was about delivering in moments that could define both his season and his reputation for years to come. Each week brought fresh challenges. Defenses had more film on him now, and their adjustments were sharper. They disguised their blitzes longer, baited him with coverages designed to force hesitation, and crowded his preferred passing lanes. The league had seen his strengths, and now it was probing for weaknesses. This is the point in many rookie seasons where production dips, confidence wavers, and the narrative turns back toward questions of readiness. But Sanders approached it the same way he had approached every other hurdle, by staying even, focusing on execution, and refusing to let the moment dictate his demeanor. One of the most telling signs of his growth came in games where everything didn't go smoothly. In those matchups where drives stalled or turnovers shifted momentum, he showed the ability to compartmentalize. A mistake was acknowledged, processed, and immediately filed away. The next series was approached with the same confidence as if the misstep had never happened. That skill, rare even among veterans, kept his team from spiraling in situations where the scoreboard could have dictated panic. His command in the huddle also deepened. Earlier in the season, he had been the new voice, finding the right tone and earning the right to lead. By this point, his voice carried weight automatically. When he spoke, teammates listened, not out of obligation, but because they believed in what he was directing them to do. The rhythm between him and his receivers was now instinctive. Timing routes landed perfectly. Adjustments at the line were understood without confusion, and the offense moved with a cohesion that was a direct reflection of his presence. There were defining drives that stood out, late-game pushes, where the outcome hung on his ability to move the chains under pressure. In those moments, his composure seemed almost unnatural for someone in his first year, whether it was threading a pass into a tight window on third down or checking into a run play after reading the defense. His decision-making repeatedly put the team in position to succeed. These weren't just flashes of talent. They were glimpses of what a long-term franchise quarterback looks like. Off the field, the shift in perception was equally significant. Media questions that had once been laced with skepticism began to focus more on his process, his relationships with teammates, and his vision for the team's future. Analysts debated his ceiling not in terms of whether he could handle starting, but in terms of how high he could climb among the league's best. His presence in these conversations was no accident. It was earned through months of consistent performance and visible leadership. Within the locker room, the respect he had gained was solidified through moments unseen by the public. He celebrated others' successes as if they were his own, stood up for teammates when they were criticized, and made himself available to help younger players adjust to the demands of the league. This created a culture of mutual accountability that had been missing in past seasons. Players began to take ownership of their roles with renewed pride, knowing that their quarterback was as invested in their success as his own. The final games brought both triumphs and lessons. Wins reinforced the belief that the team was heading in the right direction under his guidance. Losses, though frustrating, were approached as opportunities to identify what needed refining. There was no finger-pointing, no emotional unraveling, just the steady work of building towards something greater. That mindset resonated through the entire roster, setting a tone that would carry into the offseason. By the end of the year, the transformation was undeniable. The player who had been introduced as a late-round pick, fighting for scraps of playing time, was now viewed as the central figure in the team's future. He had gone from someone many thought would need years to develop into someone who could lead meaningful games in his first season. The contrast between the preseason doubts and the postseason reality was as sharp as it gets in professional sports. The story of his rookie year will be remembered for the way it rewrote expectations. It wasn't simply about defying critics, it was about redefining what was possible when preparation, talent, and opportunity align. His journey proved that draft position is only a starting point, not a destiny. It showed that leadership can be earned quickly when it is backed by authenticity and performance. And perhaps most importantly, it demonstrated that the right mindset can turn even the most limited opportunities into a platform for lasting impact. As he heads into the next chapter of his career, the questions surrounding him have shifted entirely. No longer is the conversation about whether he belongs in the league. It's about how far he can go, how many games he can win, and how quickly he can elevate the entire franchise. The groundwork has been laid, and the confidence in him is no longer just internal. It extends to fans, analysts, and opponents alike. The NFL is a league that rarely gives second chances to those who stumble out of the gate. Sanders didn't just avoid that fate, he never let it get close. From the first snaps to the final whistle of the season, he approached every moment as if it were his chance to prove something important. In doing so, he didn't just prove it to those watching, he proved it to himself, and that may be the most important step of all. Looking ahead, the league will continue to test him. There will be bigger stages, tougher defenses, and higher stakes. But the version of Sanders that has emerged from his first season is more than capable of meeting those challenges. The confidence he carries now isn't built on hype or fleeting success. It's built on a foundation of work, resilience, and results. His arrival has already altered the identity of his team, and his continued growth could reshape its future. The fans sense it, the locker room feels it, and the rest of the league, whether they admit it openly or not, is beginning to account for it. This is no longer the story of a young quarterback simply trying to survive. It's the story of one who is ready to lead and to change the game in the process.